Great. So in this evening's webinar on faith and mission in our families, I'm going to start with a devotion. It was actually written by Gill Lyth, who's our speaker this evening. But it was a wonderful one that she wrote for a training course that we ran on family ministry. So I'd like us just to kind of hear this story and pray, and then Gill will speak to us. And the title is The Passing On of Faith. Let's hear about a family we know so well. Your parents who were given the gift of you, given the responsibility to bring you up, to be the influencers on your faith, to grow a community of people around you. Your dad, Joseph, in the early years of your life, hearing from God through his dreams, keeping you safe from harm. I wonder what was said on those long journeys you experienced as a baby and a toddler. What words of God were spoken so that even from within the womb, you recognized the voice of your earthly father. The stories your dad will have told of his ancestors, of his lineage, all the way back to King David. Which words from the Torah did you listen to as you were traveling to Egypt? Were you reminded by your dad once again the story of the exiles of the Jews from slavery in Egypt? And did he once again recite the words from the Torah? On that day, tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. And did you ask your mum, Mary, as she held you close to her chest as you journeyed from Egypt back into Israel, to tell you once again the story of your birth? And did you listen as she spoke of the angel that came to visit her, and of the shepherds that came to visit you? On the nights when you were making your way out of Israel again, as you lay down after the long day, did you drift off to your dad saying the words, love your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength? As you sleepily got ready for the following morning to set off again, did you take comfort in your mum's words from the Torah? Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land the Lord swore to give to your ancestors, as many as the days that the heavens are above the earth. Did you wonder when the day would come that you could write the words on the gate and the door frame of your home? And when you'd finally set up home in Nazareth, did your parents, just before the light left the sky, bring out 3 gifts, carefully wrapped in cloth? And did you listen as your mum spoke of the Magi in their incredible clothes who came all the way from the Far East just to meet you? And did you ask your dad again and again if you could hold the piece of gold that sparkled and the frankincense and myrrh with their rough texture? I wonder how old you were when you began to realize the significance of those gifts. Gold for a king, frankincense for a priest, and myrrh for your inevitable death. And on the day you watched your dad carve the words of God onto the doorframe of your new home, did you realize that over the years, as your parents simply spoke about God in the everyday of life, that they were passing on to you the most valuable truths you could ever know, the most incredible love you could ever experience? Although 2,000 years have passed since that family lived out faith in the home, the words of Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 7, Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Remain the same. And in the families we know, the parents have opportunities every day in the messy, busy, sometimes mundane, sometimes chaotic, fun, challenging and joyful every day of family life. Let's pray. Thank you for your words, God, that have been passed down the generations. May we all, as parents, as children's leaders, youth leaders, as ministers, elders, grandparents, mentors, honorary parents and grandparents, godparents, all of us members of your family, may we take on the mantle of impressing upon the next generation the incredible works of your hand. Amen. So I'd like to invite Gill to, I'm just going to spotlight her, to Gill to come. Gill is the Care for the Family National Representative for Scotland. And Gill is going to take us deeper into that story and that challenge and the opportunities that we have in our ministry and our outreach connections with families. Gill, welcome.
Thanks so much, Isabel. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all this evening. So, yeah, my name is Gill. I live in Dunfermline with my husband Stan and our two kids, Joel and Hope. I've been working with Care for the Family for 6 years now, and it is just exciting to be able to gather with people from all across Scotland this evening, just to take a few minutes to, as Isabel said, look a little bit deeper about the opportunity, the exciting opportunity we have to work with families so that the next generation are going to know their God and are going to live for him. So I'm just going to share my screen here, hopefully. You would think that after doing this for 2 years, I might be slightly quicker, but not necessarily. Right. How's that? Are we seeing that?
Yeah, that's good.
Brilliant. So as you'll see here, this is just the verses that were really covered in the reflection earlier. I'll just read them through. Place these words on your hearts. Teach them to your children. Talk about them wherever you are, sitting at home or walking in the street. Talk about them from the time you get up in the morning until you fall into bed at night. So as we look at these words from the Old Testament, who is it that's speaking here and who are they speaking to? Well, they're the words of God, and he is speaking to the Israelites, the group of people he really wanted to show his incredible love to. And what are these words? Well, they're words from God to say, quite simply, how much he loved the Israelites. And indeed, now we know that that extended to the Gentiles, and it extends to us today. And where does God want to speak about his love for us? Is it simply in church on a Sunday? No, it seems to me that it is telling us that he wants us to talk about it pretty much all the time. When we're sitting at home, when we're watching TV and Anton DeBeck gives a 10 on Strictly, we can be thinking about how awesome God is and that he gives people the ability to dance. And when we're walking in the street and perhaps we hear an ambulance and we pray for whoever it is who is in trouble or is sick. When you get up in the morning, and to be honest, you're pretty tired and grumpy and would rather stay under that duvet, but we choose to think about the ways that we can bless other people with God's love in the hours ahead. And when we fall into bed at night, and thank God for keeping us going throughout the day and for those God moments that we have experienced when we just knew that he was with us. And, you know, in many Christian homes across this country, there will be pictures or plaques on the wall quoting verses like, "As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord," similar to that idea of putting on their door frames and the gates that were the entrance to their land in the time of the Israelites. And I remember my great-grandma, she had a wooden carving above the living room door, and it said, "The joy of the Lord is my strength." And when I was a little girl and I looked up at this high above my head, where I would walk under it, it made me feel like I was really passing under it. And as I grew up and my great-grandma spoke of her life as a missionary in China and in Africa, of the times when she needed her God to be with her, when my grandma was very sick, when my great-grandpa would leave her for weeks or even months on end and go traveling into the bush. Even then, I guess I realized that there was something significant about the words that she had chosen to have over that door. That reminder that God would indeed be her strength throughout those tough years and would continue to be as she became frail and died in that very house. The significance of having God's word surrounding us so that it's at the forefront of our minds at all times. And so I think it gives food for thought, these verses in Deuteronomy. Where are we focusing our time with the children we are working with? Is it time for us to perhaps rethink how we are doing children's ministry? Indeed, is it time for us to perhaps reframe our roles as family ministry workers? We spend a lot of time focusing on the children, but do we need to pull back and perhaps be focusing on the families? So let's think back to Scotland about 100 years ago. In many homes across this nation, every morning, families would have a time of family worship. The Free Presbyterian Church of Scotland say that they would still recognise the biblical requirement for daily family worship still to this day. But over the years, in other church denominations, this formal practice has died away. As the years went by, faith was expected to be taught at church. Whereas my grandpa would have sat around the table with his family, his father reading the Bible and praying, when they had my mum and uncle, they did not carry on that tradition. And along with this, another significant change in the life of the church was happening. In my grandpa's generation, he would have attended the morning service along with his family, and then in the afternoon, he would have attended Sunday school. Then as my mum grew up, there was a shift in practice, and my mum started attending Sunday school during the morning service. And then I too would be part of the morning service, sitting with my parents and sister, and then after around 15 to 20 minutes into the service, I would go out to Sunday school. I know that until fairly recently, as I've researched this church history, I assumed that church and children's Sunday school had always been this way, but the concept of Sunday school during the main worship service is a relatively recent one. It is only over the last 60 years or so that it has changed. And the reason for the change was that the church desired to follow the stage model of secular education in its Sunday schools, and at the same time took the view, quite rightly, that sometimes long sermons and active children didn't go too well together. So began this amazing development where the church wanted to give children a chance to learn and experience God within their own age group. And so parents were seeing that the church was really engaging with their children. Their children were being separated into year groups, and their Christian education was becoming almost more formal. And I think that for many parents, that allowed them to reduce the input at home regarding faith. Then we had the introduction of actual paid roles within churches to cover children and youth ministry, children's workers, youth workers. And these employed people were seen as experts. And this, in a way, disenfranchised parents. Hear me correctly here. I am not in any way saying that children's, youth, and family workers are not a good thing. They are. They are incredible, and they are a vital part of our churches. Their introduction, however, did shift the culture once again within church and led to even less faith input within the home. And for many parents, this idea of sharing faith at home has not been modelled to them. My parents did not do it with me, and so I am learning a new skill as a parent. But the exciting thing is that parents can share faith in so many ways in the midst of life. It doesn't need to be a family worship time around the breakfast table or a long prayer time last thing at night. What we're looking to do is provide parents with the confidence that they can share faith in the everyday. We're not needing to add another budget line to our churches. We're not asking parents to carve out 45 minutes of their lives every day to focus on God and the Bible. We are taking what is already in place in church or what is already going on in family life and integrating God into those. So the charity that I work for, Care for the Family, did a research project a number of years ago called Faith in the Family. And it looked at two major things. Firstly, how do parents nurture their child's faith at home? And secondly, what does the church do to support and equip them in this? And the main headline that came out of this was, only 50% of children brought up in Christian homes will choose to follow faith when they are adults. It became apparent that the lack of faith nurture at home was having an effect on children's long-term commitment to live a life with Jesus. Can I just say at this point, this is a difficult statistic to hear, especially if you're a parent of a child or the parent of an adult that has not chosen to have a Christian faith. So we must use this wisely, sensitively and sensibly when we're communicating to parents. This is meant to stir us to action and not in any way to make parents feel guilty. Because you see, despite 85% of parents believing that they are primarily responsible for their child's spiritual development, they also genuinely believe that the church is better placed than they are to actually do it. So Care for the Family created the Kitchen Table Project. This is a movement of mums, dads, carers, church workers and churches who are passionate about seeing faith developed at home. The website is full of resources and support as you work with families and children to see the next generation grow in faith. So, what came out of this research report? Well, when we began to think about parents who had lost confidence to share faith at home, maybe we could say, what were the hurdles that were preventing them from perhaps even trying? I don't have enough time. We all know family life is busy. And especially with us coming out of the pandemic, a lot of parents are feeling overwhelmed. And the idea of adding another ball into the already precarious juggling act fills them with dread. And that's why we need to communicate. We're not adding anything on. We're looking for opportunities in what they are already doing to talk about God. The next thing we found was that parents were saying, I just don't know where to start. Nurturing faith can seem like an overwhelming task, and we can be the people to empower parents to make that start. I don't think I'm a good enough example. Most parents are all too well aware of their failings, and now they don't always get it right all the time. Family life can be challenging at the best of times, and it's easy for parents to feel that they're not the best example. But we can explain that actually getting things wrong is not a bad thing to show your kids. None of us are perfect. And it means that they are journeying with their children, and they get to teach them about forgiveness and a God who forgives and a God who welcomes back, just like the amazing parable of the prodigal son. I don't feel qualified. For some parents, the idea of talking about God with their child feels daunting because they worry that they're not going to know the answers. And also, if a parent is looking at the church's children's work and seeing that it's so engaging and wonderful, and they just think, oh, I could never match that. I could never do anything as good as that. And we need to share with them that there is value in everyone, no matter how little they feel they know. A positive way of sharing with a parent the opportunities they have to share faith at home, and that the church is not necessarily the best place to do it, is this image. A child who is growing up at home will probably spend at least 21,900 working hours within the home. It could take the average church group more than 421 years to spend the same amount of time with this child. What's clear? Parents have the biggest influence on their kids. They have the biggest influence on the faith of young children. And this is followed, our research showed, by church leaders, then Christian friends, then church youth leaders, and then Sunday school leaders. In our Faith in the Family report, the vast majority of church leaders reported that they provided some activities to nurture children's faith, almost 100%, but supporting parents to nurture faith in the home, that was down at 60%. As I just mentioned, most children spend only an hour or two a week in church compared to 30 hours at home with their parents. And that creates a challenge when we consider the balance of resources going into nurturing children in church compared to helping parents nurture their children's faith at home. Both parents and church leaders feel that faith should be nurtured at home, but they agree there is still a lot of work to be done in this area. But there are significant opportunities for families and churches to work together in this. And one of the ways that we can empower parents is by recognizing parenting as a ministry. And this may mean changing the language we use in our church leadership. And when we actually recognize that parenting is a ministry of discipling the next generation, it gives it value. And it can make parents feel that they are going to be supported in this most important role in their parenting journey. If we are given the opportunity to convey this to the congregations that we're a part of, then perhaps we can invest more in this area of ministry, and we can place value on this important role that parents are playing. I think really the best way to describe this is that going forward, we need to join the dots between families and the church and the child. So let's have a quick look at how faith develops in children, and that can help us then to think about how we can maybe equip parents. Some of you will obviously have heard of this. It's a helpful model from John Westerhoff, and he suggests that there are 4 different stages. Stages isn't always the best word because it makes you think that it builds on from one to the next. I'll explain more about that in a minute. First of all, experienced faith. So this is what we do. This is how we act. And this is the first experience of Christianity that children will have. They experience faith in the church and at home and in interactions with others. And what children see at this stage will impact them in later life. So it's important to remember that at this stage, the way they encounter faith will become what they see as normal. I remember when I first started dating my husband, he's from a missionary family. They were very outgoing in their faith and talking about their faith. I was from a family where that didn't happen in the home. And one day we were having a meal and my father-in-law said, oh, we've just had news that Uncle David is really not that well. Dear Lord Jesus, I pray for David right now. I got the shock of my life because he seemed to have seamlessly gone from talking to us in the room to talking to Jesus. And for me, it was such a significant moment because what I saw was it is normal to have Jesus as part of the conversation at the dinner table. It was an everyday interaction. And at the age of 20, it was the first time I had seen it modeled. And so we, with our children, try to do the same thing. Everyday interactions with children at this stage will contribute to their perceptions of what faith is and form the basis of their understanding. Then there is affiliative faith. This is what we believe. This is our church. So this is when they join in and they copy what they see around them because they want to fit in. This is when children especially want to join in and feel that they belong. Not that long before the pandemic, we had a church weekend away. It's our practice in our church to share words of prophecy. And we were all there for the weekend and there was a few people who had gone forward with a word. And then my daughter, who was just 9 at the time, she went up and she shared a word. She said, God says he loves you all. And in that very simple way, she was joining in. She'd seen what others do. She'd heard God speak, and then she did it herself. An amazing thing when the little people around us are watching us and they want to have that sense of belonging. And so the parents' role in this is crucial, but it's also important that the children have really good relationships with other Christians, with yourselves, in the children that you're working with, also in peer groups. So it's really important that we're getting children involved in the whole church community so that they feel they belong in the family of God and feel valued. And then we have searching faith. Is this what I believe? This is where the intellectual questioning kicks in. At this stage, children want to understand things, rationalize and wrestle with what they believe and why. They might ask difficult questions that we don't know how to answer, and we can't give neat and comfortable explanations. 4 years ago on Monday, my son's best friend died of cancer. At the time, and still now, the obvious questions arose. And we had to deal with that. The reality of the fact that God had not answered our prayer to heal him. The reality that Joel had lost his best friend. The questions were hard. I didn't have the answers. I wasn't able to give neat and comfortable explanations, but in terms of my son's faith journey, it was crucial that he went through that. It's important that we allow the questions, the doubts and the challenges, and be honest in our responses. We can search alongside them because knowing that there won't always be answers can be immensely helpful too. And then we have owned faith. This is what I believe. When children become convinced that what they have experienced and been taught about God is true to themselves, and they choose to follow Jesus and own it, their relationship with God is personal to them. And that's what we want, isn't it? Faith in adulthood cannot be secondhand. It has to be owned. So as I mentioned before, these stages might look different for all of us and happen at different ages. They might overlap. People might dig into one for a time and then come out of it. But it's just really helpful to be aware of these different elements when we see the children that we are working with. It helps us to think, how are we going to support them in the stage that they are in? So through our research, our understanding has developed and shown that there are some key elements that make a big difference when it comes to building faith in the home. And this is the kind of thing that you can begin to talk about with the families that you work with. So we have elements that build faith, and the first is home. The warmth of relationships in the home are important. When kids feel loved, secure, accepted, that can help create a strong foundation for faith to grow on. And so we can be practically helping here. We could be telling them about resources, about relationships and parenting. Care for the Family has loads of things on parenting, on relationships that you can easily download for free. You could do with parents, you could give to parents that they could do in their own time. And it's a great way to support the families you work with and to show them that you care. The second thing we realized was it's all about being real. It's not about expertise. Parents are not perfect. We're not perfect. But living out our faith in a genuine way inspires children to want it for themselves, to be real, to model to our children what it looks like to love God and to follow Him. I think a lot of our time, our relationship with God can be quite private. And we think quite a lot in our society of Jesus and me. But actually, we need to be open, that they see us praying, that they see us worshipping, both parents and people in the church. And as we touched on before with the difficult questions, it's not just always showing the positive side of faith. Children can sense truth a mile off, and it is okay to say, sometimes life is not okay. And sometimes the church is not always perfect. The next thing is to be intentional. This idea of finding simple ways naturally in the everyday of life. So while walking to school, a parent could say, wow, look at the bird in the sky. Isn't that amazing that God created that? Really as simple as that. I think the big thing that has come out of looking at building faith in my own children is this very thing about being intentional. The decision for me to choose to point my kids to God, it was really quite significant. It takes work, it takes dedication, but it has been worth it. And as children, family, youth workers, you have that opportunity to support parents in that. Belong. Involving children at church, building relationships with others. So important. Evidence shows that the faith benefits of the influence of a grandparent are huge, but that doesn't need to be a blood tie. That could be other adults in the church. Whether your church is a huge youth group or are there only one or two children, they need to feel that their church is their big family a place where they belong, that they have a contribution to make. You could be a part of creating a welcoming and inclusive church, creating a booklet which parents can use to explain the church building or worship service. If you had a vision statement for your church, could you produce a child-friendly one? Find ways for families to serve together, like the whole family on welcome one week. A really key one, especially as children are getting towards the end of primary, beginning of secondary, involving them in the service and in the ministry, helping with the AV, handing out notice sheets, them being part of the worship band, taking the collection in, leading the prayers. Another thing you could encourage is parents to identify individuals within the church who could agree to pray for their child and take an interest in them. Invite the older generation into Sunday school to share parts of their story and let the children pray for them. So many opportunities to show children that they belong. And of course, prayer. We cannot forget the importance of prayer. Praying for the children and for the families that we work with. Now, I've spoken an awful lot here, and I think I'll just bring it to a close. But I think the important thing to remember in all of this, we could have the best programs, we could have the most amazing material. We could think that we've got the rota sorted out from now until kingdom come. But do you know what really it's all about? It's about relationships. And when I start to think back about my childhood and my connection with church and faith, I was interested to notice that I cannot remember very many Sunday school lessons, and probably not one of the sermons. What I remember is my youth leader listening to me and handing me tissues for my tears when I was being bullied at school. It's speaking to a lady called Mary, who was in her 80s at the time. Every week after the service, she would come and speak to me and she would give me sweeties. I remember going to Bob and Edna's house, a couple in their 50s who gave me chocolate, fizzy juice and told me stories about their work with the Gideons and let me stay way later than they were probably intending me to stay. What I remember is the relationships. We can be the instigators of these relationships, whether that's ourselves, whether that's encouraging the wider congregation to be involved, whether we can be the people that support the families we're working with. We have an exciting opportunity to be part of a child's journey to have a faith of their own through to adulthood.
Gill, thank you so much for sharing, for reminding us about joining those dots and where we've become disconnected from family and separated even children from families. When they connect with church, they connect into the Sunday school and they get separated from the different generations. So there's an awful lot there to think about and to explore, and there'll be time in groups in a short while to be able to look at that. So I'd like to just juggling my different things I have to do. It's all very technical. I'm going to now invite Julie to join us. So this is Julie Robertson, who's from Strathaven Trinity Church. And Julie's going to give this some of what Gill's been talking about, some arms and legs and a bit of an example of how in her church they connect and engage with families and how that might develop and grow faith in the children that they work with. So Julie, we'd love to hear a bit about from your context and your situation, and then we'll be breaking into groups after that.
Lovely. So thank you for having me. As Bill kindly introduced there, I am Gill Robertson, and I am a paid worker for Strathaven Trinity here. So I am just going to share my screen as well. and hopefully it will work. There we are. So as I say, I've been at Strathaven Trinity now since March of 2021. So in the midst of COVID, but prior to that, I did work at a Chalmers Parish Church in Larkhall for 3 years as their children and family worker. So things have changed slightly for us. In our current setting, pre-COVID, most of our restrictions are now lifted, but we moved from having a very active volunteer base, committed families with vibrant Sunday schools, with a really established base of children and youth activities, to now being in the position where we lack volunteer support. We have families who are finding it difficult to return into the church environment for whatever reason. We're seeing a reduction in our children coming through to Sunday school. And realistically, we're kind of starting again with all of this children, family and youth work after a bit of a hiatus throughout that COVID period. So throughout COVID and throughout that time away from our families in church, and from all of the things, the conversations we were having and things that were going on at that time, I certainly have felt more of a call in this particular post to find ways to pull alongside parents and families. And that focus for me has certainly shifted from the upfront kids thing that we had going on to being much more about inclusivity of the whole family and looking at ways to kind of support and nurture parents in the sharing of faith. So initially, in my post at Strathaven, I introduced some home packs that we could send out to families alongside some community trails. Much as what Gill was saying, the reality for our families is that they spend time together, they spend time outdoors. So as it was near Easter, we popped up some posters of Easter eggs with QR codes to help people, as they walked along, find them as part of a trail, but engage with the story as a prompt of how to discuss Easter and all that happened over that time. So alongside that, we delivered these home packs for the families to use. They were really successful. Most enjoyed having something with a bit of a structure to help that ignition and focus that conversation. Most parents had struggled, I'm sure anyone who homeschooled struggled with holding any type of attention for any period of time, and also how to present Bible stories at home, how to share that type of information. So I've attached a photo with all identifying features blacked out, just sharing a little bit of feedback from a family who requested a pack, but it didn't actually belong to our congregation. So the success of this caused me to look at other ways that we could reach into the home and support parents in that way. So I've included a link there to the URC Christmas packs that we used. However, you will see that obviously 2021s are sold out, but it's worth keeping the link and see what they have available for this year, because they were excellent to help families over the course of Advent have daily devotionals or daily ideas of ways to kind of talk through the stories and share conversations about Jesus and faith at home. Within our Sunday schools, we wanted to look at ways that we could connect with those who were still worshipping online. We are still live streaming our services. A lot of people are still choosing to worship from home and not actively come back into the church building, which is entirely, their prerogative, but we want to know how to reach them and make them know that they are still part of this family, that they are still prayed for and welcomed and cared about. So we had lost quite a lot of those tweens, the ones that were kind of too old for Sunday school, not quite in leadership when COVID hit. And those were the kind of bracket that we've lost the most. Interestingly, through some of our more rural areas, because we cover 3 areas, we've actually seen some of those numbers grow through this. And you will see from our picture here, one of our churches had their first nativity in quite a few years. We started building a very deliberate and intentional home element into our Sunday schools. So we started looking at the Journey Together material. And again, I've included a link there, which grew from the Together at Home resources that had come out through lockdown. The they mean that there's a home section that we can send to children or send to families who want to worship at home, that they can have from the teachings of church that day, some family activities to go and share together. Or alternatively, if the children have been at church, there's some structure and some questions that they can go home and ask their parents about what they've learned that day, that they can share what they have done within that context of Sunday school. It's been really encouraging to see families enjoy sharing those stories and come back and tell us all the tales of what they've done together, of the activities that have been provided week on week. Around Easter time, Muddy Church provided some really good prayer walks as well. Again, as Gill was saying, just building into those little things that families will be doing anyway. You will spend time together. You will go outside and enjoy a walk in the woods. How do we build into those conversations? How do we make that a prayerful experience for these families as they go through? So again, we included some of those. Leading on nicely to our big faith-filled feast that we took part in last summer. So as Gill had mentioned, the Kitchen Table Project is an absolutely fantastic resource. And if I can encourage you to look at anything tonight, please do go and have a look at that. We opted to have our big faith-filled feast as an outdoor kind of summer activity. We had it in a public place, so the middle of Strathaven Park, with the intention of trying to encourage people to wonder what we were up to, what we were talking about, what was going on here. And the picture I've included here is of some of our children taking off to climb in the trees, because why would you not want to do that if you're surrounded and have the opportunity? It was a really worthwhile time to spend together, because whole families got to meet each other. They got to spend time together, they got to re-engage, and the parents got to talk to each other about sharing faith and about sharing faith with their children. And that open and honesty that Gill had mentioned was something that really came through in that experience. There's many options in relation to using this type of material. Some people might have a 3-course meal indoors, some people had done it online, but the kind of public space, the picnic blankets, was just to make it quite informal and easy for people to access and be part of, and also to access who and what they needed. There's the concept that Gill had mentioned that paid workers are experts, and I can assure you that sometimes I am absolutely not the best person for the job, and that there are many people in our congregation who have the skills or knowledge or experience to share, and it was great for people in this opportunity to have the ability to share their stories, their testimonies, and have families recognise, you know, that these people could really help them out because they'd already experienced what they were currently going through. So that was fantastic to see. Following on from the kids' desire to be in nature, as you saw from the tree climbing, we ran on to have worship in the woods once a month over the summer period. Again, if you haven't seen this resource, I would recommend it. It's a beautiful resource and full of lovely ways to engage family in creation. So my whole take on family ministry, whether it's right or wrong, is that in our setting, in our church, most families work, and they work full time. So therefore, of an evening or after school, I would tend to consider that to be a time to run events where children are dropped off and picked up. But in the weekends, I try to ensure that what we are providing are family events where whole families can come together and come along. Because if this is the only time that families have off together, then they would want to spend that time together. And it was important that we provided opportunity for them to be as a family in worship and faith together. Now, that's what was right in our circumstance. That may be completely different in yours, so it's worth considering the kind of timing and frequency of these kind of family events or what you're running. But in our circumstance, that certainly is what fitted. So during COVID, we did start up some buggy walks with the intention of introducing parents to parents. We have a lot of new parents, a lot of people who hadn't been able to be out or get to know each other or have support. And now that we have kind of had our restrictions lifted, we have now become 3 toddler groups across our 3 church buildings. Now, over the summer, we're looking at growing that slightly again into a Diddy Disciples event to encourage the kind of sharing of faith with very young babies, toddlers, songs to sing, how to pray together, how to share those type of experiences together. And again, worth a look. So going forward from here, these are a lot of things that we have tried, a lot of things that we have encouraged people to be part of. But going forward, the main issue, as Gill quite rightly pointed out earlier, facing our parents in our context is knowing the how to share faith. They don't feel they're a good enough example. They don't feel qualified to share faith. And what does it look like to create a window so that they can see the struggle that you have and share how you use faith and how you rely on God to help in those times of struggle, while still shielding and protecting them from all of the detail of the bad stuff that goes on in the world or around us. And that's the part that we find most of our parents are struggling with. So this sense of being overwhelmed and underprepared, we're hoping to alleviate via some Parenting for Faith workshops. Growing from that, the hope that we want to see is a greater discipleship between member families and to share faith in all of our homes. Have our discipleship grow from our older congregation members, praying for our families, sharing their stories and their testimonies, and finding opportunity for them to be together. So thank you very much. That is, in a nutshell, some things that we have tried so far, and hopefully it gives some practical ideas as things that might work in your context.
Julie, thank you so much. It's really, really helpful just to hear your story. It's great. Okay, so Julia, thank you. What I was really struck with, it was a journey of change, and you've kind of rethought as you came out of COVID, and from that whole kind of experience, you've rethought what you do, how you do it, why you do it, and you've been very intentional about connecting into family ministry, and very intentional about thinking about how do we really grow and how do we share faith. So thank you so much. I'm going to pop a few questions into the chat, which we'll ask you to look at in breakout groups. I think Gill and Julie have shared an awful lot of really important things, and you may want to come back to them for further discussion, and that will happen after the breakout groups. So there are 3 questions there to discuss, or you can take the conversation in any way that you choose, what would be most useful for you as a group. And you've got 15 minutes in your groups with 4 or 5 people. So I hope there's plenty of time to discuss what's happening in your situation, but also to pick up on some of the things that Gill and Julie have shared. Okay, so have a good discussion in your groups, and we'll meet back here in 15 minutes.